Hello, everyone. Well, I hope you're doing well this week. Now, with businesses and entertainment facilities reopened and mostly back to full operation, many Americans have been looking forward to once again traveling on summer vacation. However, due to the massive increase in cost of just about everything from fuel to groceries and entertainment to hotels, many Americans are now reevaluating their travel plans simply to determine what they can afford. With the national average price of gasoline at almost $5 per gallon, and it's continuing to rise, many Americans will likely curtail their travel plans in lieu of either a stay vacation or some lower cost entertainment close to home. Some are even evaluating if they can afford to take time off from work, and because of the labor shortage that is continuing now, some employers are encouraging employees to forego their time off. Although the high gas prices and the rampant inflation is nationwide, Georgians are at least better off than many of our fellow citizens in other states. According to the AAA, Georgia now has the lowest average gas prices in the entire nation. This is because of the decisive action that Governor Kemp and the state legislature took to ease the impact of higher gas prices at the pump. While the surge in oil prices are directly because of President Biden's war on American energy, Governor Kemp took the initiative to at least suspend state fuel taxes. Not only does this provide at least a little relief to Georgians, it may provide some incentive for others to travel to or at least through Georgia this summer. While the federal government is racing toward big government socialism, at least here in Georgia, we're putting the interests of our citizens first. Soon after Joe Biden was inaugurated as president in January of last year, we began to see prices for goods soar. At that time, me and many of my Republican colleagues argued against further government spending, especially the massive spending legislation that Speaker Pelosi was rushing through the House at that time. These big government spending packages were actually a double-edged sword to our economy, and our economy was already struggling to recover from the COVID pandemic. First of all, these spending packages were significantly increasing our federal debt by spending way beyond our current and projected revenues. The first side of the sword was the deficit spending itself, which actually lowers the value of the dollar, and this naturally causes inflation, especially at the spending levels of these bills. The second side of the sword was that the money was being used to stimulate more spending by consumers, which was not needed at the time. Consumer spending was already high, and further incentivizing more spending simply put more pressure on the supply chain, which was already struggling. And while the Democrats were sending out more stimulus checks, they were at the same time suppressing the supply chain by placing more rules, regulations, and restrictions on suppliers, which created even more shortages, driving prices even higher. But regardless of how hard we argued against these bad policies, the Democrats, they pressed forward. And as the rest of the nation watched as prices began to skyrocket, the Democrats went into denial. At first, they claimed that there wasn't any inflation. Then it was that the inflation was temporary, or as they called it, transitory. Then, when they couldn't sell that narrative to the American people, they denied that the inflation was due to their policies. But now they're having to eat crow because inflation is out of control and there isn't anyone else to blame. At least now, some Democrats are reluctantly admitting that inflation is here, it's bad, and there isn't much they can do to fix it. The truth is, they don't want to do what is needed to fix it. A few months ago, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta issued a statement that inflation was at least in part due to the massive spending of Congress. And earlier this week, Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, admitted that the Biden administration was wrong about inflation. That would normally be considered progress. The first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem. However, instead of listening to his Treasury Secretary, President Joe Biden responded by punishing Secretary Yellen for her comments. The White House has announced they are putting together a new team to handle the economy, which will significantly reduce Secretary Yellen's influence. Again, this administration is so set on imposing big government socialism, they're willing to not only sacrifice the American economy, they'll even sacrifice their own people if they don't stay in lockstep. Now, on Thursday evening, President Biden finally addressed the crime wave that is sweeping across the nation. But instead of adopting meaningful changes to his policies, he resorted to using the most recent shootings as a means to pass one of the Democrats' primary legislative goals, and that's gun control. He stated in his address, "We must do something." But just doing something, as the president espoused, is not the answer to addressing this wave of violent crime. The laws that he suggested that Congress pass will not curb the violence we're experiencing. Laws are only effective when people respect and obey them. Those that are carrying out these violent acts are already breaking numerous state and federal laws, and the idea that suddenly they would abide by new laws, it's not only ridiculous, it's irresponsible. If laws banning the sale or possession of certain items were effective, we wouldn't have an opioid crisis in this country today. The fact is, this president and the Democrat leadership in Congress are partly responsible for the outbreak of crime in this country, due to their war on law enforcement, attempts to defund the police, and putting into place district attorneys that are sympathetic to criminals instead of victims. The most effective thing we can do to address this epidemic of crime is to focus on advanced security measures for our schools, support mental health intervention, and give law enforcement the tools and training they need to combat crime. Whether it's lowering the price of fuel, slowing down inflation, or effectively curbing crime, all of these are possible with the right policies. Unfortunately, the Democrats in Washington are more dedicated to the progressive left ideology than doing what is good for the nation. However, the American people are recognizing this, and it's showing in polling numbers and during the recent elections. An overwhelming number of Americans recognize the nation is on the wrong course and are desperate for change. And while it still will be a struggle, Republicans in Congress are doing everything we can to stop the Democrats from doing even more damage to our country. And we're actively working on a legislative agenda that will restore our economy, our freedom, and our security. With these policies and working hand in hand with governors who have put their local economy and their citizens first, we can restore this nation to one that is free, safe, and full of opportunity. God bless you, and God bless America.